Hello, here we are. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope you liked the little countdown and it didn't do too much of the suspense. Oleg, good to see you here as well in the chat already. Not that you spoiled my little surprise, but you kind of did. Um, so here it goes. Wait a second. Welcome to my office. It's bigger on the inside. If you didn't get that joke, you have to watch Doctor Who. Okay, I did tweet about it in public. Yes, I just wanted to have like some sort of I don't know, entrance or something. But it's fine, perfectly fine. Um, I'm also not going to use this a lot. It's also like the lighting has to be super perfect. Um, Up the volume, it is to maximum. We've had the same question last time, and it kind of was on the receiver's end. If I mean I did change the position of the microphone. Sorry, wait a second. Maybe that's better. So I hope that's better. Doctor Who, yeah. So there's a question. I learned from the first thing that I have to like kind of repeat the questions that are in the chat, because once we upload this to YouTube, there is no chat. So the question is if the new season of Doctor Who is any good, and if you didn't watch anything after Matt Smith, that's fine. I think it goes downhill from there. So I think I think the best Doctor is still like it's pretty close between David Tennant and Matt Smith, and from there on it's downhill. I think, but it's still a very good show altogether. Okay, sound is better. Perfect. Then I would say let's get started and look into some code. First of all, what I want to do today is again talk a bit about TanStack Query version 5, pick off where we left the last time, and then probably look into a new issue to tackle. When we take a look at what I did the last time, it was about the feature of exposing the custom cache. And that feature, we made a PR, and I think I'm kind of happy now. There were some iterations after that of changes that I need to do. We can quickly go over them, apart from me writing some documentation as well. There was a problem that the actual query that you get passed to the setter, it didn't actually have any access to the query cache. So just to recap, if you haven't seen it, the last time we were trying to expose the actual query store that React Query has for the internal in-memory storage, and try to expose that to customers so that they can pass in their own thing as long as it adheres to the correct interface. So the interface is this query store, which is kind of like we use a map internally now. And this map basically has a get and a set and a delete and the values method that we're using. And as long as you provide something that has the same interface, you can choose your own like in-memory storage that you want. And one of the feature requests, one of the reasons why I thought this is a good idea to do, is just to yield some control back to you to users of the library, and also to do something like limiting the size of the in-memory cache that we have, because sometimes on React Native sizes can get quite big, and storage on mobile devices might be limited. So usually our cache is like time-based. So you can say everything that's not used will be garbage collected either immediately or after 15 minutes. But sometimes what you want to do is to say, okay, as long as I have like a couple of 100 kilobytes or something, or maybe as long as I have 5 or 10 queries in the cache, it's fine. I can even keep them even if they're unused. But once it gets too big, I want to kind of do something about it. And that's what this interface is supposed to, like, for example, can do to you. So I've wrote a test for that, and then I found out that it actually doesn't work, which is weird. So what I did was then we create a new query cache, and I've renamed the API to experimental just because I'm not sure if we're not going to add some more typings later. So if we are like going to internally use another method that's also on a map, but not on the public interface, I don't want to make the public interface too wide. So I just said, okay, let's keep this experimental for now. It's probably not gonna change much, but better safe than sorry. So we're creating a max size store, and it's kind of like it extends a map. And what it wanted to do is that on the setter, it's going to check if the cache, like if I'm wanting to add a new query to the cache, if the size is too big, then what I wanted to do is kind of remove all the other items, remove all the other inactive elements. But we didn't have access to the cache because the query, like the store itself lives in the cache. And I thought about passing the cache to the store, but then you have access to something like your parents, so basically you kind of get like this circular dependency in there, and that wasn't really good. And then there were some discussions on the PR about this. Let me just open the PR once again in the discussions view. So there was like a bunch of discussions there, very good discussions. Hello, I see you're the author of Zodios. Is this? And he, sorry, I have a very hard time pronouncing that nickname. Is it? Sorry, no, I'm just not gonna do it. we should all go with like first names or something. Yeah. So we've the two of us we discussed a little bit the APIs here, and I'm right now quite happy with it because when I found out that when we call the setter function, we get the query pass because we're going to add a query to the query cache anyways. And then a query actually has access to the query cache. We always had this internally. And the only thing that I needed to do to actually have access to the cache and then kind of execute like cache.findAll and remove the other queries in here was to expose the cache as a getter that was already there. And I think this must happen somewhere here. Yes. So there has always been a this.cache on the query itself. And now what we can do is we can just expose this with a simple getter and then basically access it here and then call findAll and remove all the queries. And then what we can see is that in this test, this cache has a max size of 2, I think I gave it. Yeah, there's a max size of 2 when you create the store, and then we like put the first query in there, we have it in there, we put the second query in there, it's then 2 queries in there, and then once we put the third query in there, what happens is that we only have one query in there because I've just deleted all the other ones that are inactive. You could also just remove like only the ones that are above the size and so on, but then we can see that the only one that's in the cache is actually the data 3 because the data 1 and data 2 have been deleted. So this API kind of works and I'm happy with it. Let's see if I'm not going to merge it right now. I'm just going to let DPR maybe stay open for a little bit longer, and maybe there are some more discussions. Maybe we can finish like the discussion that we've started here. But apart from that, I'm pretty happy with the outcome of last week's refactoring and adding the feature, because most of the parts were refactoring for the internal structure, because we weren't using a map before. We were using I think a JavaScript object and a list, so kind of like 2 ways to store it. Okay, question from the chat. If there's a ton of active queries, what would happen if the max has been exceeded, in the case that the maximum has been exceeded? Yeah, so the maximum in this case, from what we've done here, is that where's the code actually? Must be here. The maximum is not like a hard maximum that you say you cannot have more than n queries in the cache, because everything that you use actively on the screen needs to be in the cache. Like I thought about what happens if you remove an active query. What happens is that it gets removed from the cache, and the next re-render, your query will go into hard loading state, and it will fetch again and then try to put the data in there again. Because if something is on the screen, it needs to be in the cache, and then it needs to be in memory anyways. So you can do this with this API, like you can go and always remove an active query, but if you do that and your component re-renders for some other reason, or that part of the screen re-renders for some other reason, your component will go into a hard loading state. And I think this is why I think it's not a good idea to do that. It might work for some situations where a component like never re-renders and you just render it once, put it on the screen, and that's it. But this is why, like in this example or in this test, I've specifically done like all the inactive queries. So what I would do if I need to do this API as a user is to do exactly this and just say, okay, everything that's active needs to be on the screen. It needs to be in the cache. If my size is 10 and I have like 20 on screen, well, then I've chosen a bad size, but then I will still have 20 in the cache. And then like once they go inactive, they will probably be purged then if I try to set a new one. We can also do this on the remove, for example. Like you can also override the remove method, the delete method. And you can say, okay, if I have like 20 queries in the cache that are active and my size is 10, and I delete one of them, I can instantly also remove it from the internal store directly. Okay. How complicated do you think I think this means internal code for TanStack query is? Cringe query, yeah. How complicated? Well, there is some complexity in it. Not gonna lie about that. It probably takes some time to get used to it. If you're looking at all the edge cases, especially about how the retries work, how the deduplication works, how all of these things work together. And initially, it's also not that straightforward to see how the data flows. We need to really like know how it's done. So it goes from the query client to the observer to the cache and then to the internal state machine and then how it's updated. And it also uses classes internally, which if you're a React developer, you're probably not using that much. So there are some functions that do some mutations on class-based things, like members of the class. And then like after that function, there are some assertions on that element. So, it's not the easiest code to look at, but with the test coverage that we have plus TypeScript, I think it's a very good library to also start contributing to if you want to do that. Yeah, what's up with the cringe query? Quick sidestep. There was some tweet on Twitter, obviously, about TanStack query being named after the creator Tanner, and someone found this like, I don't know, I think they said pissed off by that. I don't know. It's one person's opinion, I would say. I like the name. I also like the brand, so I'm not gonna argue with that. Yeah, query needs an internal xcalc draw data flow logic sketches when onboarding new members. I do have that on my blog actually. So my blog is on tkdodo.eu, and I have a blog post called Inside React Query, where I have multiple blog posts on React Query. I'm also writing a new one, which I really like from the idea. It's not published yet, but I can tease as much. I hope it's going to be good. So there are some xcalc drawings of how things work together, and at the end there's like one picture that puts it all together, and that's this one about the React Query architecture, which I hope kind of explains what the key points are. So where you have the core and the framework specific parts that are kind of not coupled together, and also there are framework specific parts for other frameworks, which I think is a pretty good move from the direction we're going towards. Okay, so I think enough about this custom cache issue. What I would like to go into is the next issue that I want to do today, which is, I think like we said, there's so many open PRs and there are not that many issues open that I can actually tackle. There are some about server-side rendering where I really hope we're going to get some help from. But there is one about the size improvements. This is an issue that I've created when I thought about version 5. It was also something that I already wanted to do for version 4, but the adoption of browsers wasn't that much of the features that we want. So what we want to do is, or what I want to do, and this is kind of just a rough guideline, is to get the size of TanStack query, the React adapter, down to like a 1-digit min-zipped size. So if we look at bundle phobia, and then we're gonna do at TanStack React query, we see that it's now 11.8, and I think it's like something isn't merged yet. I think it's about 12 kilobyte on the main branch right now. So going down to 10 would be like a little bit below 20% size reduction, which is a lot. I'm not sure if we're gonna get there, but it would be really cool to get there. And there are two things in particular that I wanted to do for that. One is to not transpile optional chaining and the nullish callback, the question mark operator, because it adds a lot of JavaScript to the bundle, because lots of browsers already support this. And then there's another thing that we can do, which is switch to private class fields and methods, because we are using classes and we are using private fields and private methods on those classes. But because they're only private in TypeScript and not in JavaScript, they're actually public, so people can use them. I hope nobody does this. If you do, in the version 5, it will be really private, so you cannot use it then. But if you do, yeah, you'll need to find a different way to, like, depends on your use case, what you want to do. The private things shouldn't really be used. They're not part of the public interface. Because what happens is that once we go to really JavaScript private fields and methods, is they're going to be really private, so you cannot access them. And that also means that minifiers can then go and change the name of those functions, because if they are like public on a class, the name cannot change. And then like some of the names are kind of long, and then but minifying those because they are private and they cannot be accessed is something that a minifier can do. So this is something that I'm really looking forward to do. And there's a question about if optional chaining adds to the bundle size. Yes, it does, because as you can see, if you have like a statement that says question mark dot and then you call a function, what this transpiles to, unless you have like your transpiler set up to actually use the newer syntax, or to only support browsers that have the newer syntax. But if you're using Next.js and they're targeting per default all the browsers and you haven't changed that, this is the code that will come out of it. So it's going to make like a comparison to null, double equals with null, which is the comparison to null or undefined. So it will come down to a larger bundle size, and also with the question mark operator. I have prepared a REPL as well, where we can see this. So if we're using this target list, and if we are like going down, for example, we do Chrome 83, then we will see that, ooh, this is like everything that comes out of it. Or if we're doing like, let's do Chrome, I don't know, is there something very old? Yeah, so if we're doing like Chrome 20 for whatever reason, then we would see that all the private class fields are like done to some very obscure code with object defined property and some ID that gets incremented and stuff like that. And then also the question mark dot, and then if we add a question mark to it, it will also obviously like add some more comparisons with null and question mark and so on. So it kind of like transpires to a lot more code. If you do this a lot, then your bundle size will increase. But if we are going back to Chrome 84, the input and the output are literally the same. There's like no difference in this. So that's what we want to strive towards, and I hope that this can give us a nice improvement in bundle size. Another question from the chat: how much back and forth is there between React Query and TRPC on a new release? For version 4, it kind of aligned very well. So if you're not aware, TRPC is an end-to-end type safe framework that I'm very fond of, and it uses TanStack query as the view layer on the client side. So it needs TanStack query to work if you're using the React adapter for it at the moment. And that means that it also needs to have a peer dependency on a certain major version of TanStack query. So for version 4, when we released version 4, they were about to release version 10. This kind of aligned perfectly. And I've already talked to Alex, who's the creator of TRPC, and he said, yeah, whenever you do a new major version, we also have to do a major version. But they're already talking about version 11, and we are talking about version 5. So I am in contact with them on their TRPC Discord channel, and we're talking about this quite frequently, and it's going to align nicely, I would say. Okay. Let's take a look at the browser list that we currently have. And so first of all, let me just open up the code. The first thing I want to do before I start any refactoring of some sort is to actually do a baseline. So if we want to measure the size, the first thing that we have to do is to kind of find out what our baseline is. I mean, we know that the baseline of the main branch is about 12 kilobyte minzip or whatever this was. But now we actually are on version 5. And in version 5, we've already merged a branch that removes all the overloads. And this also removed some runtime code. So I really want to see like which kind of improvements this gets us by establishing a baseline first. So let me just double check what we can do. So we have a build script, and that build script is something we can run. And then it does some more, like, I'm going to just remove that for now so that, well, first of all, I have to create a branch. Sorry, that's the first thing I'm going to do. Let's create a branch. New branch from version 5, and then let's do feature size improvements. Okay, cool. So let's start first with, so this is, we use rollup to create our bundle, and then we do type check, which is named a bit weirdly because type check actually creates the type definition, the DTS files that we're also shipping. And then we are building like the ESLint plugin query, which needs to be built separately because it doesn't use rollup. And then we're copying some types. But for now, I really want to do just the minimum because last time, first of all, it takes longer. And last time when I did something on stream, the stream kind of froze because I executed all the tests at the same time. That was kind of not so good. So I'm trying to do the minimum amount of work to get this to work out. So we have the build script that builds things, and then I want to actually go to the rollup config, and then I think what I want to do is I only want to build the query core and React query, because building everything else is probably unnecessary at this point. So let me, like, just because to see the bundles, I think that the sizes of the adapters are all like pretty much the same. So let's just do query core and React query and just remove all the rest, and then we'll see hopefully what we like this. Okay. Hey, Tanner is here. Thanks for joining. I just deleted a bunch of stuff. It's just temporary. I'll bring it back. Okay. So let's just run the build script once and see what it yields. Or actually, sorry, there's another script that's better for this. That's called test size. What we also run in CI, and it basically runs the build and then calls bundle watch, and it kind of checks the bundle size of specific files, like the ones that live in the bundle watch file. So only the UMD files are going to be checked, and it's going to give us a pretty good output of what the size is going to be. So let's do test size. I hope the stream doesn't freeze again. So we're just doing query core and React query, And then it's still going to show all the other things because I haven't cleaned. Okay, cool. So let's clean all the outputs and then do the test size again. Build. Okay, cool. Now we have the query core and React query, and React query is 11.74 kilobytes, at least according to this, and the query core is already below 10 kilobytes, 9.91. Okay, so this is our baseline, 11.74, where we want to go away from. So the first thing we said we are going to do is we are going to take this browser list that I have added here in a non-copyable format. Thank you. Is this the same one? No, it's not. Let's just take it from the Babel REPL. Let me open this again. Let's copy it from here. This is what I want. Okay. And then I have to find out where we actually have our supported browsers. There's a browsers list RC. Okay. So and then I'm going to, I don't know if this is the syntax that we need, but whatever. Okay. And then those need to go. Okay. So just by doing this, I think we should already see a decrease in bundle size, unless this doesn't work. And I think it doesn't work because, and this is something that Damien, our view query maintainer, has already pointed me towards, is that we actually would need higher targets because there is something inside Babel that I don't fully understand. Maybe somebody else does. I've read the description, but it doesn't really tell me much. If we use this browsers list and we tick off the bug fixes checkbox, then it still kind of transpiles this back. And then there's like bug fixes, and then we turn it off and on, it kind of goes back and forth. So we want bug fixes. Of course we want bug fixes, like who doesn't want bug fixes? So if we look at Babel preset env bug fixes, we're going to see that it defaults to false, and it's enabled per default in Babel 8, which is probably why it was on here. And then what it says is that by default, Babel preset env grouped syntax features into collections of closely related smaller features. These groups can be large and include a lot of edge cases. From this grouping information, Babel enables or disables each group based on the browser's support target you specify. Depending on your targets and how many modern syntax you're using, this can lead to a significant size reduction in the compiled app. It doesn't mention any drawbacks. I don't know why it's named bug fixes, really, but naming is hard. So I'm going to turn on bug fixes and see how it works. Yes, I can just enable bug fixes. That's also what's mentioned in the chat. So I'm going to do that. It wasn't enabled because it's not enabled by default. So let's go to our Babel config. And then we have loose set to true and module set to false. And then we just do bug fixes set to true. Okay, whatever that does. So what was the 11.74 was the baseline. Okay, cool. So let's run the test size again. Let's just note that down somewhere. I'll just write it in the chat. Just to like, paste doesn't work in the chat for me. Okay, cool. So just write it in the chat, and then we have like 11.74. Okay, cool. Test size. Do you think this changed something? Want to place any bets? Last minute. 11.13 and 9.33. Wow. Okay. That is 0.6 kilobytes already. So that's mainly, I think, for the optional chaining output. We can take a look at the output if you're, I mean, I haven't stored the old one, but if we look at the query core and then the UMD production output, and then soft wrap this. Probably gonna see some question mark dots. Yeah, so 91 question mark dots and then a bunch of question marks that we probably didn't see before. That's fine. So this worked. That's cool. So there's our first improvement already. We've lost 0.6 kilobytes. And let me just commit that. So we have the browser list, we have the Babel config, and the package.json and the rollup config I'm not going to commit. So we're going to move this to the package.json, also not to a separate thing. And then I'm just quickly going to commit that. So this is what are we doing here? We're doing some, is this some refactor? Yeah. And we're doing okay, cool. So I think that was a very good first step. Let me just take a look at the chat if I missed some of the things. Subscriptions not available. I don't know what that means. I'm very new to all of this. Sorry. I'll try to get around to this if after this. And yes, finally someone's using IntelliJ. I am using IntelliJ. I've also mentioned this the last time already, and this is the new beta appearance UI of IntelliJ, and I love it. Okay. The second thing on the list for this feature would be to look at all our private things and change them to real private fields. And what I would do is I would just search for private in all the files and then probably go over them file by file. It's actually more than I thought it would be, but it's like, I mean, I could do it with replacing it in all the files, but what we actually need to do is we need to go over all the private somethings and replace them with, not with private, but with the real private. And the syntax for private fields and methods is the hash prepended to a name, which I think is weird a bit. And if I like to replace all now, it kind of now is named hash focus. And what I hate about this the most is that I can't double click this thing to copy it, right? Because the hash for some reason is not included when you double click it. Whatever. So now we have to add a bunch of hashes to the usages. Shouldn't be that many. There's probably a better way to do this with search and replace. Maybe if the files get bigger or the users get larger, I'll do this in the next file, but this is fast enough, I'd say. Okay, here it's kind of the same thing. And now we can do something like we replace this.observers with this.hash_observers and replace all. And then we place this dot. Oh, now it does both of them, even though there's a dot. That also sucks. This dot mutation cache with this dot hash mutation cache. And then logger. The logger is also going to get removed. So this is in another PR. So we're also going to drop a little bit of weight there. And then we have dispatch. So is this dot dispatch apparently is going to become hash dispatch. And now we're down to a bunch of, so it's this.retryer, and that's it. Okay. It's just to here. This is something I probably could have done up front, but I don't know. There isn't much. Question, why do we have private mutations if we're not using them? Still here. Oh, I didn't rename this for some reason. Okay, so this dot mutations becomes this dot hash mutations. Or are they public? Let me just see what they were before. No, they were private. Okay. And that's it. Okay. To the questions. Have you tried JetBrains Fleet? I have not. I've heard about it. It's supposed to be a more lightweight editor than IntelliJ itself, but I haven't used it. Okay, so this dot client is going to become this dot hash client, and I'm going to do this for all the other things as well. What do you think about providing custom state manager to React query? Optimistic update sucks with nested objects. It would be nice if there will be a possibility to use at least IMA. Well, the good news is you can use IMA. There's nothing preventing you from using IMA. All you need to do is to wrap your update function into a produce from IMA, which is something that you can totally do. I'm not a big fan of providing IMA out of the box. This is something that Redux does, or Redux Toolkit does, for the very reason that I think it's more difficult to understand when you can do mutations of JavaScript variables directly if some of the parts of your library allow IMA, because they have it inbuilt if mutations are allowed, but other places don't. And this is exactly what you get when you do something like this. For example, in Redux Toolkit, you have IMA built into the reducer, so all the reducer functions can update it. And we could do something similar for example, query client set query data. The function there could accept, could be wrapped into IMA, and then we can say, yeah, in this function you can actually use IMA. But this wouldn't, let's see if we're getting to green here. Yeah, this would mean that you need to know that you can do it in there, and you need to know that you cannot do it somewhere else. So it kind of becomes a, okay, when can I mutate, when can I not mutate? And this, I think, kind of becomes a back and forth of having to understand when the library wraps something and when it doesn't. While on the other hand, if we're saying, it's never okay to actually mutate state, I think this is a lot more straightforward for people to grasp. And then you can say, okay, if you're explicitly wrapping it in IMA with a produce in your code, then that's fine. And also IMA also adds like bundle size to the final bundle. So I don't think this is something we're going to do. And optimistic updates suck. Yeah, so good that you're bringing that up. I actually have seen this take before today on Twitter, and I also posted a kind of tweet about that. I think that optimistic updates are usually overused and you shouldn't be using them. I've also written that on my blog about mutations, because like most of the, for me it's a UX reason. So most of the time when you do an optimistic update, so let's put it like that, when you do an update, there are two different kinds of updates. Ones that need the immediate user feedback and ones that don't. And most of the time, updates that we are doing don't need the immediate user feedback. Like when you have a form and you submit that form, you add a to-do or you change a to-do of some sort. And you do it on a separate page, or you do it in a dialog, for example. If you do an optimistic update in that scenario, what happens is that you insert the to-do that the user has created, or you update the to-do that the user has edited in the place in the cache that it's currently in, And then you need to show the list, so you need to close the dialog, or you need to redirect to the list route where the to-do list actually is. And that works fine up to the point where it doesn't work, because what happens is when you need to roll back that, it becomes a lot more complicated. Because then you need to, either you just show the error and you revert the list kind of becomes like jarring because it re-rendered with the element in there. Maybe you had an animation that added the element to the list, and then you need to kind of revert it back and so on, and then you can't do the animation again. So it kind of becomes a bit of a nightmare in terms of how the UX works. Now you can say that we want to optimize for the good parts, and 95% of our mutations work, which is fine. And then you're optimizing for that, and if it fails, then it fails, which is something that I can also get behind. The problem is that the optimistic updates become, for many cases, so complicated that you have to actually emulate the logic that the backend does on the front end. So when we go back to the to-do example, where you have like a to-do list and you're going to create a new to-do, your list might be sorted by some different criteria. So now you need to go and insert that element at the right place where it will also be where the server has added it. So you need to know what the sorting is, and you need to perform the same sorting or inserting at the correct position in order to avoid it being inserted into one place, and then after the invalidation that you're hopefully doing afterwards, it will be put into a different place. And even if you manage to do that with the code that you write, you would still have the situation where something on the server really changed. So you are doing all the sorting and the thing goes into the 5th position, and then you refetch from the server and something has changed in the entities and your thing is no longer on the 5th position. So it kind of moves back and forth again in those scenarios. And because I'm just seeing in the chat that optimistic updates should only be done for updates, not for creating anything new, it doesn't change anything. Yes, even if you say that, it's still going to be the same problem. Because when you take a look at the to-do list and you have a to-do has a name and it's sorted by the name, and then you change the name, right? You need to put it in the correct position because the list is sorted by the name. Or, I mean, there are lots of situations where we have lots of tables, and we have in the product that I'm working with, and we have lots of sorting criteria and filtering criteria. You might even change the name to something that doesn't fit the filtering criteria anymore. So there's lots of logic that goes on the back end that I don't want to emulate on the front end. And no matter how good or how easy or how abstracted a way you make the process of making the optimistic update itself, you don't get rid of the complexity, because only you know what the correct position of that new element or of that updated element in the list will be. And and you're not getting rid of the UX problem, because it would. I think it would be, what's the point of doing an optimistic update if I have a list that is sorted by the name, and I change the name, and I just update it in place, and then I see my element in the list, and then after the refetch, it kind of moves because the sorting is done on the server and I'm not doing it on the front end. I'm creating the same jarring experience again. Yeah, those are kind of my thoughts around optimistic updates. And then there's the other kind of updates that actually want optimistic. I need to continue writing some code here. Sorry. There's the other part that actually needs optimistic updates, and those are the ones where you have immediate user interaction. So, for example, a toggle button. You click the toggle button, and you can click it twice or 3 times. We have had toggle buttons that didn't have optimistic updates. So you click the toggle button, it made a request, and it waited, and then it kind of turned on. And that's the worst, right? Because that's like, when you click a toggle button, it has to respond immediately. There's no way that, if it doesn't, or if it disables or whatever, you as a user will probably think that you didn't click it or you misclicked or something. So these are the cases where you'd actually want an optimistic update, or maybe even something like a drag and drop situation or something like that. But I don't think that those are most of the updates that people are working with. Okay. Whoops. And this one. And we are getting there. If you have a different opinion on optimistic updates, that is totally fine. You know, we don't have to like have the same opinion on everything. There's also, I think optimistic updates and the way to do them, it exists for a reason, and I think there are places where you would really want this to do, like I said. But the second premise is that it's hard to do in React query or in TanStack query, and I think this is true to some extent. It's not the like 2 lines of code that you need to write, but the alternatives are not that good either, because if you take a look at how, for example, SWR does it, I think they have kind of a use mutation hook, and you can provide like, you still have to provide the function that actually performs the update. I think there's no way around that, because only you know how the update is done. And then the second thing is that they have a bunch of flags that you can provide, like, should I refetch on error? Should I don't know, there are 3 or 4 flags that you need to set. And that's also complexity, right? Because there are so many ways to do optimistic updates. I think they all depend on the case that you want, because sometimes you don't want to refetch in a success situation. Sometimes you don't want to refetch in an error situation. Sometimes you want to not refetch at all because you want to optimistic update, and then in the onSuccess callback you want to write the response that you get from the server with that request into the cache without doing a refetch, just to avoid all the problems that I said before that come with refetching. So I think it's not that easy to come up with an API that like works for everybody, or that kind of covers all of these cases, and that's easier than just saying, here is the onMutate callback, please do it yourself, or do whatever you want in that function, and then whatever you return is basically the rollback. You have to do that manually. I don't think it's that bad. And if you actually have like a bunch of mutations that always go in the same manner, you always want to refetch in onSettled, you always want to set a specific entry, and so on, it's not that hard to create your own wrapper around use mutation. It's a bit harder with TypeScript because of the generics and stuff like that, but it's totally doable. And then you have like one central place where you can do the optimistic updates the way that you want to do them. And oops, that was wrong. Yeah, and that's it basically. Okay, this dot promise. There's so much discussion going on in the chat. I don't know if I should just read all of this. I probably should. Yeah, but generally, I'm just trying to get my opinion across, and it's obviously not the end of the one true opinion on everything. Okay. Nice. Okay, there's not too much left, and then we have it actually. I think this was a good like discussion to have while I'm doing this boring search and replace everywhere. Queries, and then no, this goes here. But we're almost done. And then once we have this, we're gonna run the next one. Oh, this also did queries map perfectly. That was nice. Okay, privates become a hash again. Okay, and then this dot. There's like so many private things that I really think this is going to, I hope this is going to pay off nicely. So we're going to have this dot mutation cache replaced with this. And then this dot logger is this. Okay, and then you can also see if the tests are still passing, but I don't think they will be, because I think the tests also access some private things, and this is gonna be fun to fix. I'm still wondering why we have tests that access private stuff. Probably because there was no better way to, oops, I don't know. So now I'm almost regretting that I didn't try to write the regex, but I'm not going to write the regex on stream. I should have prepared this. Because otherwise I hate regex. I don't know. This is, you can do search and replace with regex here, but it's anybody likes regex? Okay, that was this one. And then let's do this one here. I can do this manually. And then it's just this, and then there's one big file left, and that is the query observer. Why is this never read? Are you serious? Okay, whatever. Okay. And then the last one is the query observer. I'm just going to do this with the same procedure as every year. Here it's going to be like a bit more, so it's this dot client is going to become this dot hash client. And if I'm right, and Cursor is actually like minifying this, I didn't check that. That would have been a good thing to check up front. Is Cursor minifying private class fields? I don't see a reason why it shouldn't, right? Because they are private. They're just like variables used inside a normal function. So they could do this. The query observer is really the one with the most private thing. So there's options. Okay, maybe not. Let's see. It's not that long until everything's gone from red to not red. Oh, there's a lot of red, but I think it's all the same. Yeah, that was stupid. All right, any other questions in the meantime until I have this figured out? Yeah, ChatGPT, ask them for the regex. That would have been cool. I used ChatGPT before Christmas to write a small script in Node to kind of parse a directory and read all the style sheets, the CSS files in there, and then read out all the URLs and kind of visit the URLs and download the files and store the files. And with a little bit of back and forth, this actually worked pretty well. Okay, I've already replaced options. that's the thing. I just need to, what did I break here with the options? Well, we're gonna see afterwards, after I've done all of the normal ones. Tersa might not actually minify privately. Okay, I'm going to take a look. Well, I'm going to take a look at this in a second. Now I'm so deep into it, I'm going to. Okay, what did I do with this dot options? Let me revert this dot options back to this dot options, and then we're almost. Almost done. I'm going to open up this issue in a second. But even if, I think going to private class fields is not wrong. At least then people cannot call private things anymore. So it kind of limits the thing. So what about options? Why is... Well, I think it's not actually private. I think it's actually public. I don't know why I replaced that. Okay, that's all of them. Okay, let me open up the Tersa issue. Open up in this tab, okay. Where is the window that I want? This one here. Okay. Make private class methods inlineable. Okay. It can be inline, saving a bunch of indirections. Complete the content. Okay, but it still might be minified. I think that's not the same thing. Tersa is indeed minifying privates, yeah. So it's not inlining the ones. That's a different, but I think it's still minifying it. And if you take a look at like all the namings here, we have like current query initial state. And if you could like minify this one to a one character thing, or current result state, current result options, I think this is also one of the reasons why the library actually compresses so well, because a lot of those things are actually long and the same everywhere. If we take a look at the is the bundle for still up? Yeah, so it's like 45 and then it only comes out at 12 kilobytes. So I think that's a pretty good compression ratio. But still, I think we are going to see if these are the improvements that we wanted. Let me open up the search again, and I think we're done, right? If I search again for private, okay, so there's just, yeah, there we already see the test that I mentioned. There we are like spying on something, property this. So I need to, after we've confirmed that this kind of does what we want, and kind of like brings the bundle size to where we want it to be, we can take a look at why the tests are actually needing to look at private things, because I'm a big fan of only testing public interfaces and not some private things. We'll see. We're spying on this patch. We're checking if fetch should not dispatch fetch if state meta and fetch options meta are the same object. Yes, maybe it shouldn't, but then still there must be an outcome that's publicly observable that we care about, that we can take a look at, and not take a look if there's an internal function that was called or was not called and we need to spy on it. I don't think that's the way to write the test. Not wanting to blame, but I'm always looking at this just to see where this is coming from. Okay. So should we run the, yeah, let's just run it again. What do you think? I think we should run it again. So the new baseline is this. I'm going to paste it in here. Okay, what do you think the outcome is now? So to be, oh, Damien is here. If he's Mr. Mentor, don't spoil it, because I actually talked to him on the issue. It was kind of like the discussions here. He's our view query maintainer, and he said, yeah, he'd actually just looked at it and replaced all the things and to see the bundle size improvements, and asked, do you have the number already? And he sent me, like, I think a picture on Discord with a spoiler and said, if you want to be surprised on the stream, then don't look at it. And I didn't look at it. So I really don't know what the number is, but he knows. So please don't spoil it if you do. But everybody else, feel free to guess, like, what do you think is the number we are going to see? We have 11. I really hope it's going to be 9.99 or 9 point something, but that's still, that would be lots of improvements. It's probably still 10 plus, and I think there might be some other things that we can shave off the list after that. Okay, I'm gonna be just as surprised as you, so let's go back to package.json and run the test size script. Last chance to 7K, that would be amazing. That would be unreal. I think that's, whoa, okay. There's an error. Must be declared in the closing class. Do we have more errors? No, just one error. Okay, cool. What's up with this? Private field track props must be declared in an enclosing class. Okay. But it is. What? Note that you need plugins to import files that are not JavaScript. Okay. This dot options equals, oh, wait a second. This dot options equals options. So there is options, and that's the options that come from the constructor, and there is this dot options. So first question, why can't I make options private? Were they private before? No, they were not private before. That's why. Okay. So, but there is the tracked props, and there we assign it to a new set in the constructor. What's with the, I don't see it. I don't see it. You cannot use exclamation mark after private, a rollup bug. Huh. You're a genius. Okay. I would not have known that. Why can't we just assign it to an empty set here actually? Can we do that? Does that why do we have to do this in the constructor and then we have a set? Is that just stupid? Like, why do we need to do this in the constructor? Yeah. I'm just going to do it for this one field because the others are optional anyways. Except for the client. Yeah, I think it's pretty weird that, oh, there's the same thing. So now we're getting the same errors. I think it's weird that we, okay. Well, let's see. Let's see if that worked. Okay, that worked. Why did it just need it? Oh, I ran the wrong script. No. Shit. Yes, I ran the test jest script, which runs jest and then kind of freezes the stream. No, I didn't want to freeze the stream again. Sorry. So there is no node task running. Am I back again but non-laggy? Oh, I hope. Okay, sorry for that. I pressed the wrong button. Let's run the size test. Yeah. And there is the there's the same issue. So yeah, now we have the small delay again of a couple of seconds. I get that. So current query, it's the same thing. So we can't use the bang operator on those. And you said we should just, where's the constructor that adds this then? Current query. Oh, we don't assign it in the constructor and it still has a bang operator. Okay. So what was the use the ignore? What's the ignore? Is it a TS ignore, or what do we need to ignore here for this to work? Because we have a bunch of things with the, I mean, I can remove it. Oh, I can remove it and then TS ignore. Is that what we want? That's weird. If that's what we need to do, okay, I'm going to look into this after that, if that's what we need to do, because that's not what I would really want. I'll probably just make it optional then and use the optional chaining. Yeah, you're right. So I'm not going to keep the TS ignore. It's going to be a, it's not also not going to be a TS expect error. I'm going to try to fix this properly afterwards. We could assign it to undefined, but then we would need optional chaining everywhere, which now is just one character for a question mark, so it's probably fine, but it would mean a bigger refactoring. So let's try to rerun this and hope that this was the only file that did this. No, current result in the mutation observer has the same problem. Yeah, so we need to remove this and then oh, I don't know what happened. Probably a shortcut. Yeah, sorry. Okay, one more try. That looks good. That looks good. And it's 11.04. Okay, that's a bit disappointing. Like, how much was it before? Put an exclamation mark after the equals undefined, so no need for optional chaining. There you go. That's a good one. So we do equals undefined with an option. I think I found out that shift 1 is the shortcut to switch to let me just quickly try to fix the hotkeys and remove them. Yeah. Why did I do this? There are shortcuts to switch between scenes and I set them up pretty badly. Okay, they're gone now. Shouldn't happen again. Right, so this kind of works. So equals undefined exclamation mark. Okay, I think that's fair. I'm gonna go for that. Okay, so we now have 11.04. And what was it before? It was 11.13. That's not really that much better, I would say. I mean, we've now lost altogether about not even 1 kilobyte. Well, 1 kilobyte is 10%. So you can't just remove 10% of the bundle just like that. But at least a little bit is a little bit. Let me just quickly do this syntax. Let's remove the TS ignores. And then let's add the equals undefined with the exclamation mark at the very end, just to keep everything as it is. And then we don't have those TS ignores. Oh yeah, I can check the spoiler. I should do that if I had Discord open. Let me just do that, and I'm switching to the camera on purpose. Or let's just switch to this. In the meantime, if you don't know where to find me, you can subscribe to some of my channels. I'm on Twitter, obviously. I'm on Twitch. I'm on YouTube. And let me just, and you can read my blog at tkdodo.eu. So let me quickly check the chat with the spoilers. Where is it? Here it is. 6% from 12 to 11.3. That's the spoiler. Okay. Yeah. You're right. That's not. Well, we're actually a bit below that, but that's because I pulled in the latest. I think this was probably made before we had the switch of the overload. Okay, but let's still commit that, because it's not a bad change and it's still something. If rollup fixes the bug of the inlining, maybe there are a couple of things that can be inlined, and maybe there are a couple of other things that we can still do to decrease the size. So the tests are not working, but let's still do this switch to private fields and methods. I still think this is like not a bad thing to do, because it's a native JavaScript thing from the way that we are using it now. And I like to use the new JavaScript features over the TypeScript syntax that's actually a bit proprietary to TypeScript. Okay. What are other things that we could do? I did take a quick look at a file in core utils, and I think there is a bunch of things in there that maybe we could do a bit differently. The stream is... What do you mean it's broken? Let me quickly check this. No, I'm still live. So I just went to Twitch and it shows that I'm live. And I can also see me there. It's a bit delayed, but that's because all right, cool. And I need to get used to this. I don't know, I'm a bit distracted by the chat, sorry for that. It's the second time I'm doing this, so let me just go back and copy the current baseline in there, because I think we can get a bit better than that. So we are now down to 11.04 in total. There are still a bunch of improvements coming to TanStack query version 5. For example, we are going to remove the logger. The logger is not a private feed that's going to go completely away. We're passing this from one class to the other. I think there's some improvements in size that we can do there. There's another thing about infinite queries where I'm not yet totally sure how we're going to do it. But one of the suggestions is there's one feature that has, there's one feature about infinite queries that actually has 2 bugs, and we can fix them. But another suggestion, actually from Tanner, I think, was to kind of just kill the feature on infinite queries. And yeah, maybe I have to, I'm always a bit weary of asking Twitter or the audience of what they think about this feature. I've already asked about this feature once, if people are using this, and I don't think people do. So if we're going to decide to cut this as well, I know there's a lot of code that's really going towards this feature. Yeah. I think it's broken. Okay, what is this? What is error 2000? Is this on me? I don't know. My internet is fine. Let's keep going as if there's is anybody still? No, it's not. I think it must be a Twitch thing, right? I hope it's not me. Yep, Twitch in general. I think I've chosen a bad day. Like Thursday evening is where everybody is kind of streaming, I guess. But anyway, okay. So infinite queries. We switch to YouTube. Actually, you can stream to Twitch and YouTube at the same time. Might be something that I'm going to try out. But I think last time I also had an issue. Like there was some interruptions that were also caused by Twitch. So yeah, we're gonna look into this. Okay, so let me just take a sip of water and then I'm going to try to work a bit more. Okay. So infinite queries are also going to hopefully reduce the size a little bit, but there are some things in here that I've seen in this utils file in the query core that are now also obsolete. And one of those things is the abort controller, because we have a check that tries to check if abort controller is actually supported by the environment, and only then we return a new abort controller. And this abort controller is used to provide the abort signal that we're passing into the query function. So in case you don't know how query cancellation works, since version 4, and it's the only way to do it, but also in version 3, what you can do is you can basically just call useQuery, and then you have your query function, and the query function gets something passed to it, and that something is the query function context, which has the query key, but it also has a signal. And that signal is well, here it says it's any because I haven't imported useQuery, but it's actually an abort signal that we are passing in here. And if you're using this signal and you're passing it to Axios or to Fetch or whatever you're using to actually make the request, and the request is aborted, we know about this and we know that you are actually using the abort signal, then we're also canceling the query. And canceling the query means we are not putting the data in the cache, we are canceling the request is canceled by your network client layer function, but we are not storing the data. Because if you don't use the signal, and you make a request and then you move away from the page, we don't per default abort the request. What happens is we just take the data and put it in the cache because you might come back later, and then we're going to store it for the cache time amount of, like this is the default of 15 minutes. So with this in mind, we had this check if the environment actually supports the abort controller, but now with our new updated browsers list that we have just committed in this PR, we can also get rid of this whole function because we can just call new abort controller every time. Because in all the environments that we support now, they also must have abort controller. So we can at least get rid of a little bit of code and just do new abort controller here. And then we have this nice little TypeScript ESLint rule that tells us, and this is like one of the reasons why I think everybody should be using the no unnecessary condition TypeScript ESLint rule, is that now we've, like abort controller before used to be abort controller or undefined, and now it's an abort controller. And TypeScript would be perfectly fine with this if statement, right? TypeScript only cares about correctness. you can check for something if and then like something in a truthy manner, that's perfectly fine. And TypeScript doesn't care that this is actually not necessary because a board controller is always defined now. But ESLint does. So there are ESLint rules from the TypeScript ESLint package that complement TypeScript very well, but in a different way. While TypeScript only cares about correctness, ESLint can also catch things that are totally unnecessary, like this if statement here. And this is very valuable if you're doing refactorings and you're refactoring something that went from being potentially undefined to being always defined. So that is what we're seeing here, right? The abort controller used to be undefined. Now it's always an abort controller. It's always defined. And we can just get rid of this if statement. And that will reduce another bit of like lines of code. Let's do that. Okay, did I not remove enough? What's up here? Oh, I didn't remove the bracket here. Okay, cool. And then return undefined is also removed. So this is fine. And here we also have this get abort controller imported. Nobody needs anymore. Okay. So now abort controller is always defined, which also means the abort signal is also defined, is always defined, which means we can make this signal from here required as well. And then we're having a bit of a problem because we are adding the signal with object defined property, and we're not creating it here directly. And we're doing this because we need to know if you're actually using the signal or not, because as I tried to explain before, we are behaving differently if you have added an abort signal, if you've used the abort signal that we are providing, because only then we are going to cancel the query internally. And that's what we're doing with object defined property. We're going to add the signal property, and then we're actually having a getter, and we're returning the signal from the abort controller, just as if you had accessed, like if we had just passed the signal to it. But we can keep track if you have consumed the abort signal or not. And that's why we have this object defined property. And we're doing this actually in two places, here and here. And in both of them, actually the signal now needs to be defined. And now the question is, and there's the query function context there, and here is the second thing, the signal is always going to be defined. I want to change the type here as well, because this is the type that you are getting into the query function, which means that there we always have a signal now. It doesn't make sense to have this on undefined. So the question is, how can we create a query function context with only these three properties that actually requires us to create a signal, and then add the signal property later. And I think we have to trick TypeScript a little bit into this. So the way I would do it, here we are creating a query function context, but it doesn't have the signal. So that's why it's saying property signal is missing. So I think the correct way to do this is to just define this as omit signal, because that's what it is, right? It doesn't have a signal. This definition here per se is correct. And we can do the same thing further down here. We can just say omit and then the signal, and now this line in itself is correct. We create something that doesn't have a signal. The question in the chat, if you use signal, React query does double fetch in React 18 strict mode. Yes, that is something that I'm aware of, and this is something that is actually expected in the way how strict mode works in React 18. And I had a discussion in the React 18 working group with Dan Abramoff about this, and we didn't really come to a conclusion about the problem. So the problem with strict mode is that in React 18, strict mode also comes with strict effects. And strict effects means that in development mode, use effect and other side effects like the subscription function of using external store that we are using internally are going to be called twice in a row to prepare users for situations where this might happen by React in the future with some not yet existing off-screen API, or also just to imitate the behavior if the user basically goes to a page which triggers a fetch and then he quickly goes back to the other page and then comes back. So this double mount in very short succession basically should prepare you for the user coming back and forth quickly, or like coming to your page and then scrolling up and down, because with this off-screen API, they might fire effects when something comes into the screen, or they might pre-render a page or that you haven't visited yet, something like that. And I'm actually very, very happy that strict effects exist, because they have shown 2 bugs in TanStack query about this exact behavior. If you render a component that has use query, and this actually creates an observer, and this observer triggers a fetch, and then you unmount it, then we kind of should cancel the query if you're using the abort signal. And then if the user comes back again, there were some bugs around this, and there were actually 2 issues that I think one of them was that the promise wasn't picked up correctly and we were actually fetching twice and we just didn't notice it before. And then there was another issue with infinite queries about that. But I was actually really happy about this for us as a library author, that we can actually, okay, what happens if an observer mounts and then unmounts and then mounts again in short succession. Now, why does React Query solve the strict mode problem for app users? Is we don't do anything about strict mode. Like, there are some workarounds with a ref that you can track or something. We do none of this, right? What we are doing is the normal React Query stuff. If one observer mounts, it triggers a fetch, and then what React with this quick unmounting emulates is that it unmounts the component, we get an observer that is destroyed, but because you haven't consumed the abort signal, we do nothing, and we just keep the promise running, and we just keep the data, and if it comes back, we put it in the cache, so that in the next 15 minutes, you can actually pick it up. If you've set cache time to 0, there might also be some situations where the data comes back, and then if it's very fast, and then it's no longer there. But usually, since you're making a network request, it might take a couple of milliseconds. And this is fast, this is slower than what React is doing with this mounting and unmounting. So what happens is, you render the component, React Query makes the fetch, React unmounts the component, we still make the fetch, we don't do anything. React mounts the observer again, and we see that the promise is running already. So we don't fetch again. This is the deduplication that TanStack query has internally. So nothing happens, and that's great. It just feels like one request is being made, and that's true. But we still have, if you take a look at how the observers work, you still get the very same thing that everybody else gets that tries to fetch and use effect. You get an observer that mounts, the observer unmounts, and then the observer mounts again. So we do have this double effect still running. We just deduplicate the fetch because it's already going on. And to circle back, if you are consuming the abort signal, what happens is that when you consume the abort signal, we cancel the fetch and cancel the query. So this is all on purpose. And in strict effect, this has the unintended side effect, or the normal side effect, that the observer mounts, we make the fetch, React unmounts the observer, we see, oh, there is no more active observer interested in that query, so we abort it, and purge it from the cache, and then React comes back like a millisecond later and says, oh, by the way, we're here again. And then we say, oh, we have no running promise, we need to fetch again. And that's why you see the same thing, you see it going out twice. And the only solution to this problem would be to kind of, the discussion then turned into, well, why would you even abort the fetch? And you can't really abort a request that's going on because it already started on the server. And if you want to do this, you might want to have like a little time of 10 milliseconds or something in between before you effectively cancel the fetch, because what if the user is really fast? And I don't know. I'm just not going to do anything about this right now. There is not much that we can do. I think this is a React issue. And one of the advantages of TanStack query becoming framework agnostic is that all of this logic about mounting and deduplication and cancellation happens in the query core. Right here we are in the query core package. And I'm not going to build in a little debounce or something for React because they might think that in some situation they want to do something in strict mode or whatever. No, I don't think it's necessary. If you are using the abort signal, that's perfectly fine. You would just probably suffer the same situation that everybody that doesn't use TanStack query suffers from, which is a double fetch in development mode. But that's totally fine. It doesn't hurt in development mode. At least the first fetch gets canceled. That's the good part. Like you see 2 requests in the network tab, and one of them is like red because it got canceled, and then the second one goes through. So that's okay. All right. What we have created now is a fetch context and a query function context that doesn't contain the signal, but we want to add the signal. So this is now probably failing when we pass the query function context to the query function because it's missing the signal. So what we want to do is we want this add signal property actually changes the type of what we put in. So let's try to do that. I think I would just give this a generic, and then we would say the result type is T and signal, abort signal, because that's what we're doing. We're kind of, yeah, we're kind of like saying, okay, pass in anything, and then this is the object. And then we are returning T and the abort signal. And then once we have done that, we actually need to return it. Obviously, that's what the error says. So here, I think object define property also returns the object that it gets into. It has kind of has the same syntax. It doesn't. That's actually a pretty, it's not a weak syntax, but what would be cool if this would like define property, an object, and then I add the property. Why doesn't it, why doesn't it have like this property as well on that object? So that's what's missing here, like with the T and. But what we can do is we can return this here, and then it will not work because it will tell us that T is not assignable to T and signal abort signal. So here I would actually favor a type assertion because it is pretty safe and confined to this little space here. We are getting the object, we are adding the signal, so the resulting type is our object plus the signal, which is fine. And then the only thing we need to do is to actually inline this here, I guess. Because then we add it to this query function context and we return the object. And then I would actually like rename this to something like with signal property or so. And then we have the query function context with the signal property. And then there are no type errors. And then we have the same thing here. We need with signal property here. And then everything is in the green or in the non-red. And we have removed one util functions. I don't expect this to actually be like a super good improvement size-wise, but it's still a good improvement code-wise to remove this function. Let's commit that. This is like remove, or was it get abort function, because with our new browsers list, we'll always have an abort controller. Okay. Cool. So the last baseline was 11.04, I think. Yeah. I don't expect this to have any measurable impact on a min zipped size. Yeah, 11.02. See, so it did get us a little bit closer to the 11 line. This will be very hard to go below 10. Or maybe with more removal. But yeah, it's just a number. So at least you can see that I didn't know what the result would be up front. I think I checked this once in the past and I saw about a 10% improvement for the optional chaining, and I was hoping that the private class fields would also give us a similar improvement, but it didn't. Okay, what are other things that we could use, that we could do here? So there's, let's go this from the bottom up, where we've removed this. So replace data, we need this. We always need a sleep. Where do we actually, oh yeah, the retry needs to sleep, obviously. This is an interesting one. This is a function, I think this is a leftover, because this, like, we export this in the query core, but we're not using it internally, so I don't know why we're exporting it. So it's like it was, wait a second, it was only used in 2 tests. This is super unnecessary. So let's remove this completely. Like, this is error, and then we can go in here and we can just take this function and remove it. Another little win. And then where we are using this is error, I don't know, we'll have to, I think there are like test utils anyways, so we can, yeah, I'll come back to this. So we can put this here, is error. I don't know if this is actually needed, and then we can just do this. So now it lives in the test utils, which are not used in production. And there we can have this value instance of error. I don't see any, actually we can also remove this function. I don't see that much value in having a function that, like, over an inlined instance of error check. But okay. Yeah. Damien has just said something interesting in the chat. Use mutation to use query under the hood. This is something that I did think about. I think this is one of the things I thought about for 1 year now, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around this. But this is one of the things that would actually add a lot of features to use mutation and probably cut the bundle size in half, if we get it right, but I haven't figured it out yet fully. And the thing we're talking about is to rewrite use mutation with use query, because at the moment use mutation is completely separate. It has its own mutation cache, it has its own mutation observer, its own mutation class internally, and it has a lot of overlaps with queries and only slight differences, and there's lots of code that is actually duplicated. And when you think about it conceptually from a very high level point of view, I think a mutation could just be a query that's disabled. And then you provide an execute function that needs to take parameters, so you need to kind of do something about refetch not taking parameters, but you could just provide a function that actually calls refetch and closes over the right variables or something, and then gives you a mutation that kind of is just a lazy query, sort of. Conceptually, right? So implementation-wise, we are far away from that. But conceptually, what this would give us is like tracked properties on mutations. It would give us shared results of the same mutation around components, which is an open issue in TanStack query because the result of a mutation is only local to one component. It's not shared, even though it's in the cache. And there are reasons for that. And yeah, it's the complexity comes with the callbacks, because the onMutate callback and onSuccess and onError, they work a bit differently than with useQuery. But conceptually, I think at one point, maybe if we get to it, this would be something that could really cut things in half. Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. I also don't know why I don't get why you're testing for isError. I also don't know why we're testing for isError. Let's just remove that. Expect isError query state error to be true. That doesn't make much sense. Okay. Can we not write this differently? Can we not just write expect query state dot error to be, and then let's do this, and then we do throw error, and then we expect it to be the error. Is that not how it works? That's totally how it works. Okay. Yeah, I think this. But there was a second usage. No, there's now only this usage. Okay. So yeah, that was a weird test, and it was weird that this function was actually shipped in production. Okay. So that was this. Then we have a function is query key that basically it used to be a much bigger check because a query key could be an array or a string, so there was more going on. But actually, it's just array.isArray right now. And there is a custom type guard, but an array is also, like a query key is also just an array. So, and it's only used in two places. Oh, it's used in two places. Okay, well, if it's used in two, we could inline the check here, array.isArray, query key. Yeah. I don't know. I think this is like micro optimization, but we don't really array.isArray mutation key. We don't really do much with the results type guard that array.isArray wouldn't already do, because array.isArray also has a type guard on that the argument must be an array. So. And then we have tests for this function, which is a bit ridiculous. I think this is, yeah. I think I'm going to cut this function as well. This probably doesn't have any measurable impact. Is query key. But you know, removing it, why not? Not gonna touch this. This is all about checking if things are equal and shallow equal objects, and about structural sharing. Like, I'm not gonna touch this. Okay, replace equal deep. Also not gonna touch this. Partial deep equal. And partial match key. Here is one interesting thing to note, is that we have two functions, and this function basically just calls the other function. And the only difference is that this function is invoked like recursively. So we need it to be any here. And there we have it typed to query key, but the only tests are for this function. and this is the function that we're actually using. So I thought about unifying those two, but I don't think I'm gonna do it. I think this is the name. I mean, what we could get rid of is like one function and one function call. I don't think it's worth it. Query hashing is obviously used. And then this one as well. Yeah, I don't think. And then there's only about like query key matching and things. So I don't think there's anything. Oh yeah, there's something. Right. I found this some other time. There are some utils about array replacing and difference and stuff like that. And they're only used in queries observer. And this is only used if you're actually using use queries. So I think if we take this code and we move it to use queries, at least it could be, I'm not sure if this can be tree shaked if you are not using it, if you're only using use queries. I don't know. But I also think like we don't need to have these utils lying around in like source utils. I'm a big fan of collocating code where it's used. So like there's nothing wrong with just having this function as a local function here, difference and replace, instead of importing it from some util file that actually lives somewhere else entirely. So I think this is also good. Yeah, and that's only type definitions. Okay, so we didn't do much else, but let's run the size test one more time. Let's see if we've gotten under 11 maybe or so. 10.99. See, so we removed some unused code and we've gotten below 11, which I take as a win. Actually, we started with 11.80 or something, or 11.78. So this was about the 10%, at least 10% improvement that we made. And I think there is more to come. And the final size, well, maybe we can get it under 10. I don't know. There is mutation key from use query, and we can also kill it. Okay, interesting. Oh yes, it's unused. Nice. Well, view query is also gonna get a little bit of bundle size love. Nice. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out. All right. So under 11. That's nice. Okay, I think this is everything I wanted to do for today. Are there any questions? Maybe I missed something in the chat. I don't think so. If anyone has maybe a question or wants to see something else that we can take a look at real quickly for the last 10 minutes or so, can also take a look at the rest of the roadmap, for example. There are lots of PRs open that now have conflicts because we merged like the biggest PR some time ago, which is the remove overloads. That was really huge, thanks to Mamone War 97 who implemented this. This PR actually removed, like it was, let's just, yeah, it touched like 4,000 lines of code, and it removed 800 lines of code in total, and it touched 82 files, which must be almost everything. And we just said, okay, if we keep this PR open while we merge other PRs, there will always be conflicts. So let's merge this once and then update all the PRs where like everybody else then has to kind of do the updates, but that's fine. Let's just spread it out to multiple people so that they have to do it. Okay. All right then. I don't have anything else to look at. Nothing size-wise to reduce anymore. Yeah. If there's nothing else from you, I would like to say thank you for joining today. Thank you for watching. Sorry for the outages. I think it's not my problem, apart from the time where I ran all the tests again. I'm really not going to do this the next time, I hope. If you're not following me on Twitter, please do. Same goes for Twitch and YouTube, and you can read my blog on tkdodo.eu. Thank you, everyone, and I probably will choose a different weekday than Thursday. I haven't thought about it yet, but I will adjust the schedule, and I will also let you know on all the channels the next time. Yeah, there's a question about who took my handle on Twitch. Actually, can I buy that from someone? I don't know. It's like I have TK Dodo everywhere except for Twitch, so I had to add the number, and I always add 23 if I don't get the real name. It's only Twitch and Reddit, I think, where I don't have my name. So yeah, maybe I can get that. Maybe names can be transferred. I don't know. If TK Dodo, the one who has my nickname, is watching, please, maybe we can talk about getting it back. When will I be in Poland for a drink, Damien? Yeah, that's a very good question. I actually will be. So at beginning of this year, end of last year, I talked to some coworkers to visit our office in Poland, which we will likely do somewhere in Q1. We'll come by train and take a trip. So if I have any details, I'll let you know. And then if it's not too far away from where you are based, we can definitely meet up in person. I would love that. Okay. Thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time.